Hi, and welcome to another on-demand webinar presented by demandDrive. I'm Alex Ellison, the Marketing Communications Manager here, and with me to talk about a really exciting topic, the fate of sales development and what the future of our industry looks like, is Lindsay Fry, our co-founder and president. Lindsay, how are you doing today?
I am doing okay. Thanks. You're making me record something on a Friday afternoon, but I'm okay with it because it is an exciting topic. But no, thanks for organizing this.
Of course, look, calendar availability is what it is. It's also, I'm on the West Coast, so it's Friday morning for me.
Okay, fair enough, Alex. Fair enough.
But to set the stage for this conversation, so we were approached by Ashley Folkestad over at Transcends Marketing to help her with an article she was working on for Fast Company about the future of sales development. We can link to that article in the show notes, but during the webinar, I know you and I are looking to dive deeper into the discussions we had while creating that and really explore some of the potentially drastic evolutions that could take place in the not so distant future with all the things that are changing within sales development and sort of technology as a whole. We'll also be releasing our own blog series on the topic. So for anyone watching this, if you hate the sound of our voices and you just want to sort of read what we're talking about, we'll be releasing those in a series over the next couple of weeks. So with that sort of setting the stage, I'd love to dive in. We'll sort of break this into three categories. First, we'll talk about AI, technology, automation, how that's sort of got to where we are today and what that looks like. We're going to talk a little bit about working from home versus working in the office, hybrid, how that affects the industry. And then we'll talk about really that flexibility and future of work-life balance that I think COVID pushed us towards. So starting with the technology and AI and automation, Lindsay, I'd love to dive in first and just set the stage for how you've seen, just briefly, the technology advancements over the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years affect how SDRs work today versus a decade ago, and then we can dive into sort of that, where that trajectory is headed.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'll even go back further than that just to give some additional context. After I graduated, and I won't even tell people the year, but it was a while ago. And my first job out of college was as an SDR. And it's just in some ways, and I've talked to you about this, Alex, in some ways, the role is very similar. I mean, the objective of the role is quite similar as to what it was years ago. But there's been, to your point, so much in the way of advancements around the technology piece and the way that we enable our SDRs. So when I had started, we had email, we had phone, and if you were lucky, if you had a CRM system to track things. And that's basically what you had to work with. And obviously, you would talk about, hey, you have to be relevant to the person that you're reaching out to. And some of that is the same as it is today, right? Personalization is key. Think about, who you're targeting. But when it comes to technology, and especially in the last 3 to 5 years, the number of tools that are available to SDR teams, just from, your sales enablement tools to dialers to, AI that is allowing for personalization of messaging without SDRs needing as much involvement, to, things like really in the last 6 months, like Chat GPT and how that's impacting, how SDRs are working. It's really quite incredible. And I think we can use all of these tools to really create efficiencies and optimize what SDRs are doing, as long as we don't lose sight of what the objective is and what outcome we want to see, right? So we don't want, I think sometimes tools should be used to empower us to become better at what we're already doing and not be used sort of as a crutch and really, in lieu of something else. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I think it points to I don't know who this quote is attributed to, but it's something like if you automate an efficient system, it'll automate efficiently. If you automate an inefficient system, it'll become more inefficient. So essentially,
Yeah, I like
right,
that.
if you set it up the right way, all this automation, the AI, chatbots, if you create a system that works before you automate, if you create a system that works efficiently, then it's perfect. But I think that that's probably in the minority. I think most companies have a system that works okay, and then they say we can fix it with automation. And I think
Great
that's
point.
where a lot of the
Exactly.
problems lie. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And I think going even further, it comes down to sort of how you are training your SDR team, right? If you have SDRs that haven't been trained or given sort of those training tools and insight into how to navigate a phone call, and instead we're just pouring technology on sort of the problem, or sort of a, like you mentioned, a team that isn't performing well to begin with, or is performing at a moderate rate, you're only gonna you probably will only exacerbate the problem. But so I think it is important to have all those tracks laid before. But I think these tools are, are allowing us to do a lot more and a lot faster, and cut down on a lot of time that I've seen SDRs have to take, right, in sort of their day-to-day roles. So I think that can be incredible.
for sure. And then looking towards the future, I'm really curious because we really haven't had a ton of time to talk about this, examine it, but spend on it. But initial thoughts on how things like ChatGPT and other AI and language AI, generative AI, I still don't know all the terms perfectly yet.
Neither do I.
Like, how have you seen some of the early implementations of this sort of next step in technology and automation and AI affect SDR work? In the last 3 to 6 months, maybe.
Yeah, I know it's only been a few months, like you mentioned. And I think the first piece is, in my opinion, we need to embrace this technology, right? So I think the wrong approach is to rail against it and not utilize it for, and sort of accept that it's going to be part of our work and part of the landscape of what we're doing. And instead, how do you use this to your benefit? As you know, and we're talking specifically about SDRs here, but I think day to day, tactically, what we've been doing with it, I think it's great to help with messaging, right? Because oftentimes when we're starting a new program, or an SDR is getting started and they're creating some initial email messaging, they can utilize ChatGPT to get a general sort of framework and then personalize from there. So it's always nice. I mean, Alex, I know you help me with writing sometimes for some of our LinkedIn posts. It's nice to have a place to start. And I think that's a lot easier for folks than to start like, okay, blank piece of paper, to maybe utilize something like ChatGPT, get a framework going, and then, pick and choose some of the language that you use or don't use and personalize from there. So I think it's a great way to, not have to start from a blank slate, knowing that it's certainly not perfect and you're going to have to personalize from there. But that's a great way to utilize it. And I think from a research piece, I was sitting down with some SDRs the other day, and we were really trying to, clarify and sort of clarify some of the ways that a particular product differentiated itself from a competitor. And, we had some thoughts and we had some feedback from the client, and I did a quick Chat GPT search, and it actually gave some really concise, like easy to understand differentiators that, even if you're not using them in messaging per se, I think sometimes when you're training SDRs on how to articulate the value of a very complex solution, ChatGPT can somehow pare it down to a way, in a way that makes it a little bit easier to consume when you're learning.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't really consider that as an option. I know, to your first point, I used to have, I think it was a Yesware blog or something when I was an SDR that was just 101 email templates. And when I had writer's block, I would go there to start.
Yeah.
Because like it's stale, that's old. So being able to use a technology that you ask it specifically versus just like finding a
Yeah.
2-year-old article.
And you can be so specific with it. And so I think it's been really helpful. And I've had a lot of clients, ask about how we're, utilizing ChatGPT, and they definitely seem accepting of it. So, I think that's been a huge change in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, for sure. Last question before we move on to the next section, because I think people will want to know, do you see ChatGPT, AI, and technology replacing SDRs, or do you think it's something that will just help SDRs in their own role?
So, you know, I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did, but I do think I don't think I certainly don't think it will replace SDRs. I think people still will want and will crave sort of the human interaction with someone, and when, you know, they're at a point in the buying journey when they are ready to really, you know, make a purchase or evaluate, I think there will still be, you know, an SDR there to aid with that. Um, I do think we'll be able to do more with less. So maybe an SDR who historically has been able to only support one account executive, maybe they'll be able to support two because they will be able to, you know, optimize their time. I could see that happening. But I think that I don't see the role. I certainly don't see the role going away. I think it is, you know, what you mentioned. It takes, you know, you can take a good SDR and make them amazing and make them really efficient, and give them a lot of time back to actually do the strategic work, right? So if we can have technology do a lot of the, you know, more of the tactical, either research, messaging, you know, account mapping work, and that and sort of the optimization of sending emails and dialing and knowing who to, you know, when to contact a person at a certain time. It'll just help them to focus on, how do I navigate through a call? How do I, you know, have a really meaningful conversation with someone? And how do I uncover more sales ready leads, for, you know, for my account executive?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's good news for any SDRs out there.
Yes.
Although long term,
Who knows? Ask me in 5 years, maybe I'll have a different answer, but
who knows? We're all guessing. Moving on to the second part of the sort of the conversation we had with Ashley, talking about getting back into the office. Obviously, COVID hit. Everyone started working remote. At least I think everyone in sales. Obviously, some industries didn't, but had at least some experience working remote. And now we're seeing it start to shift back, right? I think middle of last year, some companies were earlier with everyone comes into the office. And now at this point, I think this month or next month, Amazon is everyone's at least 3 days a week, right? So a lot of big companies are calling people back, and usually that sort of trickles down to smaller organizations. Obviously, different companies do different things. When it comes to sales and SDRs and SDR managers and really the sales part of an organization, do you see that helping? I know there, you know, in the past, there have always been just fully remote salespeople, right? The job can be done remotely. So is this something that you see pulling salespeople and SDRs back into the office? Or do you think it's something that sales has changed? We now really live in this hybrid world where if we want to be in an office, we can. If we don't want to, we don't have to.
yeah, I mean, I get asked this question a lot, and I talk about it a lot, and I have, you know, I think that what COVID has allowed us to do, right, with this sort of shift in working from home, is definitely have a better work-life balance and building the flexibility into your day. And I think people being able to spend more time with their families, you know, maybe getting rid of long commutes and having, and, you know, getting some time back in their day. I think that's really nice. And I don't, and I think, you know, the pendulums will swing a little bit, you know, come back a bit from this full remote. Like you mentioned, I know Amazon's, you know, requiring people to come back into the office. What I believe is that a hybrid environment is optimal. Give people the flexibility of working from home part of the week, but then bringing them together in an office environment to collaborate, to learn from one another. I think it's really hard, even with all the great technology that we have on Zoom and whatnot. It's still I think there's still something lost, you know, by not being in person. That said, I think, like you mentioned, there's been completely remote salespeople this whole time, and it's worked just fine. I do think the SDR role is a little bit different, the SDRs tend to be, not always certainly, but tend to be earlier in their career, where I do think an element of in-office coaching and training is really valuable. Not to say that it's necessary. I mean, we've been mostly remote over the last 3 years, although we are trying to bring back, more of a consistent hybrid, workforce. And I think it's worked, right? I think we've had some, phenomenal SDRs be extremely productive. I think it does come down to the individual. I think there's certainly people that are probably more productive at home, get more accomplished. And I think there's some people that probably get less accomplished. I do think that the one thing I worry about, which I know you've heard me talk a lot about, is, when you're in your home, in like your, office or whatever, your home office, you're not sitting next to other people that are doing the role with you. So I think, you were an SDR, you would learn from someone sitting next to you, even if they weren't calling on behalf of the same client, you pick up on tips and tricks that way. I think some of that is lost. Now, I think Zoom is great. I think there's tools out there where you can do more collaboration, where you can listen on calls with each other. But I do think that some of that does get a little bit lost. What do I think will end up happening? I think that I'm hoping we find a happy medium where we have, I don't think we should force people to come in if it's proven that they are effective and doing well in a remote environment. But I think we should have the option there for people that might be struggling or that are maybe, new to the role that need a little bit more support. And I personally think that, a hybrid schedule, I've been going in for 2 days a week, pretty much this entire time, and it's really worked well for me. But we'll see. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I think
you're not making you come back to the office. Would be a long commute from Seattle.
Yeah, you let me move across the country, it'd be tough to.
But I think you're someone who is efficient working from home. But I know that when you were living in Boston, just a year and a half ago, you were coming in the office a fair amount.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what it comes down to is, I think trust is a big part, and then the sort of motivation or reason for working from home. So obviously having your manager understand, you just basically said, right, you trust me to work from home. You know how I do my job and it works.
Yep.
I think the SDR role, like you said, is entry level, and you do have to take time to build that. And you can build it remotely through like activities and really showing your work to your manager, but it's much easier to build in person. The other thing I think is important to make a distinction is that motivation. Are you working from home because you think you're better at working from home, or are you working from home because you're more comfortable there? Because that example you gave, right, where you're on the sales floor, everyone can hear every call you make, it's uncomfortable, but it's a great way to learn, get out of that comfort zone, right? Build up your skills. You can have, I hang up the phone on a bad cold call. I've got someone sitting next to me that can say, hey, listened into that. Here's what I might have done differently. Here's what I might send in a follow-up email to save face if you can. Those are really valuable things that are uncomfortable. It's a confrontational conversation. And if you're coming out of college into the SDR role and you don't know what it entails, and you can work from home and not call next to other people, and that's more comfortable for you, it can be very easy to fall into that default, not understanding that in the long term, that's going to be worse for your development as an SDR and sort of career growth path. Yeah. So I think the working from home can work, but it is personal. It's about the manager figuring out and knowing who the SDR is as a person and why they're working from home, and really just building that relationship to be able to understand, like, hey, you should be coming into the office more, or no, you don't have to come into the office at all because you're doing the work right either way. That kind of thing.
I mean, I think it has been nice for people in other geographies to be able to work, like if someone lives, like outside of Boston, obviously, or outside of Massachusetts, historically, they wouldn't have been able to work at demandDrive. And now that's not the case, which I think is a really kind of cool opportunity to get exposure to other groups of people that are sort of outside the area. But we'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Moving forward to the next one, which is, it's an easy segue because we're still going to talk about flexibility, the future of work-life balance. But I want to really focus this one actually more on from the individual standpoint. So you're an individual person. You say, what am I going to do with my career? Let's get into sales. Is that, and at the same time, we're looking at the economy, especially because of COVID, and the gig economy has increased. There's companies like Fiverr and Upwork where you can just like, here's $100, make this logo for me. Here's X, give me Y, right? You can do a lot more freelance stuff through these platforms, through the internet, through the globalization of the economy than you ever could before. In the article that we'll drop with connected to Ashley, we link to a quote from Mark Cuban that he essentially says, the future of work is a gig economy. Like primarily people are going to want to work on their own schedules at their own time. And that's easier with contract work, right? That's easier if you can say like, I drive for Uber in the morning and I'm an SDR at night, like being able to do that sort of thing. To that example, do you think that sort of gig or like part-time contract type system works in the SDR role, or where do you see any flaws in what that could become?
No, it's a good question. And I think you referenced the Mark Cuban quote, and I can't remember where I read this, but I was reading somewhere the other day where someone said, in the future, everyone will have like 10 jobs, like because they'll be doing a bunch of different things. They won't work for one specific company. And I think that could very well be the case where people, crave that flexibility, that variety, the ability to sort of control their work and really, focus on what, either work so that they can earn money and use that money to focus on what they enjoy doing or explore a couple different avenues. And I do think it could work for the SDR role. I think maybe for someone who's a little more senior in the role, I could definitely see it working. I do think, and right? I mean, you were one of them. We hire a lot of SDRs right out of college and university, and they go through a rigorous training program, and that's really important to them because they haven't had that type of training. So you would need to get the foundational elements, I think, before I'm just talking about the SDR role specifically, right? I think you'd have to get some of those foundational elements before jumping into say, hey, let me sign up for this SDR role. And I could foresee, right? And I'm sure they exist today, platforms where SDRs can hey, sign up to help on a campaign that a company's running and needs support on. So I definitely could see it working for people that maybe at least have had some exposure into it and know what they're doing, and can work autonomously, right? Because you wouldn't have necessarily the coaching and the management and the oversight. But I think definitely if you've been an SDR for 6 months and then, like you said, hey, I want to drive for Uber in the morning and then I'll do some calling and jump on and support a client and drive webinar registrants or follow up on the piece of content or something like that. I think that's absolutely something that's in our future.
Yeah. And I think you're pointing to an important aspect of it is that the need or want, I guess, at this point could be there for any company that runs an additional marketing campaign that needs, it's one of the things that we do well, right, is we can add an extra rep to one of our clients' things if it's a busy season or if they have a specific campaign they want more leverage on, webinar registrants, whatever it is. If you do it all in-house, that can be a little more difficult. So I really see this being a good advantage for companies that, medium-sized companies that are we really want to make a big marketing push here. How do we do it? Let's add an SDR just for these 2 months, just for this campaign, just for this.
That flexibility.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, and I think the more, I think where it would get challenging is if it's a very nuanced message or, it takes, it's a very technical sell and it's an outbound program. I think it's probably lends itself more to, like you said, hey, we need volume. We have a very straightforward campaign. We need someone who is articulate, who can, drive some velocity here around something specific. But I think if it's very complex, then I think it becomes a little bit harder, because you want this to be frictionless, right? You need it to be like something that's easy to set up, easy to understand, and easy to execute, and then easy to sort of scale and kind of rinse and repeat. Um,
Yeah,
but I think in those environments, it makes sense.
yeah, and that points to one of the important distinctions, right, between a lot of the gig economy. To like say you're a driver for Uber, you have a driver's license and like that you have a driver's record. That's easy stuff for Uber to check and say, okay, you're good to go. What do you do if it's like, oh, okay, I'm on this platform, there's 3 or 4 SDRs that I'm looking at to add for this one role for these next 2 months? Is that like, do I have to go through the whole interview process? Is there like a standard evaluation that they go through, right? I think those are a lot of the questions that need to be asked and figured out before the SDR role can really be figured out in the best way possible for a situation.
My best guess is that it would start somewhere, like I mentioned, like something really straightforward that's easy for somebody to kind of learn and execute on. I think the more complexity that gets introduced, the harder that becomes, but it's not impossible. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think that's, in 5 to 10 years, we'll see. I think we could be having a very different conversation.
Yeah, could be really interesting. All right, Lindsay, I know we're coming close to time here. I want to give you, though, as much time as you need or want. If for any final thoughts or advice for sales and marketing leaders out there that are really looking at the future, right? Looking at the technology, looking at the work-life balance sort of change, there's a lot shifting.
Sure.
Is there anything that you've sort of held on to that's important to keep in mind as we move forward into sort of uncharted territories ahead?
I mean, I think the biggest theme that we touched on this is utilizing technology to empower an already successful team, right? Use that to optimize what's already working to make it even better. I think you touched on something so important about, like, if you're pouring it on to something that's not working, it's not going to be it's not going to solve the world's problems. But I think it can really, I think that's a big piece of it. So making sure that you have like that training, the coaching, you have the right people, and you have it running pretty well, and then you can utilize some of these tools to make it even better. So I think that's a big piece for me. And I think not forgetting that, the importance of engaging with your team in a human way and not relying too much, right? I don't want to see us swing so far in the other direction where it's like now we're just scared to interact with each other in real life, right? So I think, as a business leader, as a manager, whatever, making sure you are engaging with your teams in a meaningful sort of human way. And I think some of that is like getting together in person when you can and making sure they have that support. And then support just from other people, and then also support from the tool set that you're using to empower them. I think those are the biggest takeaways for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. Love that. Lindsay, really appreciate you coming on, talking about this. It's been a fun process working with Ashley, coming up with the article and brainstorming all that. If anyone has any questions for you or wants to follow up with you in any way, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, Lindsay Fry at demandDrive, and then feel free to send me an email as well. It's just lindsay.fry@demandDrive.com. Or they can find you, Alex, and I'm sure you'll get them over to me.
Find me, find AJ. All good avenues to have a conversation with Lindsay. I'll pass you right along. No.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Lindsay, for coming on. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And until next time, enjoy it.
All right. Thanks so much, Alex. I appreciate it. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.